when we think of correspondence with the facts, we probably think of the facts as, in some sense, available to us independently of what we believe. As if you could look and see the facts just plain in front of you, like a scene. So suppose you think of verification of a belief in terms of a scene. It's all very well for some beliefs, perhaps. The heyday of the correspondence theory in the early 20th century was Russell again, defended it, and Wittgenstein. Wittgenstein's first book was called the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus. In fact, it's the only book that Wittgenstein ever published. Wittgenstein apparently was much impressed when he wrote that book by a scene he'd witnessed in a court in Paris, where there was something to do with a traffic accident, and the court was presented evidence in the form of sort of two Dinky toys, or however many Dinky toys it took, sort of meandering around a sort of little, doll's house type setup. And that showed the jurors, or the judges, what had happened in the course of this traffic accident, how the accident happened. So it was a model. And Wittgenstein thought that seeing this model was, in some sense, a paradigm of finding the truth. And the elements of the model corresponded to elements in the real world. This Dinky toy corresponded to the car that the defendant was driving. This one corresponded to the car that got crashed into, or whatever it was. So you've got this sort of one-to-one correspondence between what was shown in the model and what was shown in the real world. And Wittgenstein thought that's correspondence. It became known as the picture theory of meaning. And it's all very well, but it doesn't seem to work for all facts, if you think about it. It doesn't work very well for negative facts. For example, how could you show a picture showing that something didn't happen? I've actually got a nice story about this. My family and I have often gone for walking holidays in Scotland with some friends who are here indeed. And we started off on the shores of a place called Loch Duich, under the Five Sisters of Kintail, if any of you know the northwest of Scotland. And there was a holly tree in the grounds of the house we were in. And there's a story about this tree that when the holly tree grew to the point at which its trunk was the size of a cart axle, there was going to be there's a prophecy about a chap called the Graham Seer, the Braham Seer. The Braham Seer was a famous chap with prophetic powers. And he exercised his prophetic powers by looking through a hole in a stone. He had a stone with a hole in it. And when he looked through this hole, he could see the future and tell you what was going to happen, which is very impressive. I'm not sure how often his prophecies were verified, but they were certainly quite famous. And the story is told that when he came to this holly tree, which was a very little sapling when he lived in the 16th century, he looked through the hole in the stone, and he gave the prophecy. And the prophecy was, when this holly tree trunk is big enough to form the axle of a cart, a great battle will not be fought on this spot. Well, now, you have to ask yourself, what did he see? And there's no answer. I mean, he couldn't possibly have seen something which deserved predicting as a great battle will not be fought on this spot. But what did happen was, about 70 years later, when the holly tree had indeed grown quite a lot, two armies, I think it was General Monk and Montrose, was it, in the Covenanting Wars in Scotland in the early 17th century. One went down Loch Duich and the other army went up Loch Long, which is parallel to it, and they missed. So, 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 in fact, it was true that a great battle was not fought on this spot. But you can't just see a scene in which it's correct to describe it as a great battle was not. Well, you can say there's no great battle being fought here tonight, but it wouldn't have justified the Graham Seer, the Graham Seer, in making that prediction. Anyhow, the point is that when you've got complex beliefs, a belief in this case of a negative fact, it's not like having the seen. It's not like it's not something that can simply be shown you. Again, it's got to be an interpretation of the scene, and it's through the arrival of different interpretations of scenes that we form our beliefs and decide what's the case. So correspondence only gets you so far, if anywhere. Coherence, on the other hand, doesn't quite cut it, because you can have coherent stories that are false. So where do you go next? Well, there was a movement in philosophy parallel to the arrival, some of you may have heard of the arrival of analytical philosophy, which was largely due to Russell and Moore at the beginning of the 20th century. Well, there's a parallel movement going on in America called pragmatism, and that's what I want to talk to you about. The principal pragmatist was Charles Sanders Peirce, C.S. Peirce, a very, very fine philosopher who's actually not a professional philosopher, who's professionally his life was with the United States Geological Survey, who was a scientist. And but nevertheless, he wrote extensively about philosophy. He was part of a group of people basically surrounding William James in Harvard. And Peirce really was the moving spirit, along with some other people. There's always other people in a philosophical movement. He was the leading light of pragmatism, and he was probably the best pragmatist. William James had a lot of pizzazz about him and wrote about pragmatism. But Peirce was there before him. Anyhow, Peirce began, I think, the emphasis on practice as the litmus test of truth. So truths were going to be the things which were useful. The simplest form this theory could take would be the view that truth is utility. And William James himself actually used that kind of formula. So James, for example, then came across, he was criticized, vehemently criticized by Russell and Moore. They said that James basically thought that wishful thinking gave you the truth. So if you found a belief very convenient, if you liked it, if you hoped that it was true, that was eventually a matter of it being true, because it was useful to you to believe it. But that's not the form that utility has to take if it's going to be a litmus test for truth. It might be useful to you and pleasant to believe that you're the most popular child in the class. But if 20 people each believe that, then 19 of them are wrong. So even if it's useful for each of them to believe it. So believing of yourself that you're popular might be useful. It's good for your frame of mind, but it's not true. So there's, again, as a definition, it just seems to fall down.
To continue watching this video, click the link in the top left or in the description below. Or visit iai.tv for more debates and talks from the world's leading thinkers on today's biggest ideas.